Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. And you?
I'm doing great so far. I'd like to thank the listeners for tuning in today. And today on the Voice of Yoga, we will be discussing the separation from mother and the union with the divine. Now, Swami, I know that when you talk about mother, you are not necessarily talking about a biological mother. Would you start our program today by explaining what mother means in the Kriya Yoga sense?
Yeah, the term mother doesn't mean your actual parent. In fact, when we look at it more as a mythological image, it's more like a category, that the mother is associated with what we call the feminine principle. Because one of the things that we try and do is make a very clear distinction between gender and principle. Because a lot of the symbolic languages seem to be very principle-centered, but we try and interpret them as gender-sensitive, and that's where we get into a lot of misconceptions about it. That the feminine principle is really all about, in Kriya Yoga, the path of descending prana. And that is associated with all of the things that we would connect with the manifested world. So the feminine principle is how we put things into form. So, and that's not necessarily just giving birth to children, but it's also how we give birth to ideas and inventions and our creativity. So it's anything that is associated with manifestation would come under the heading of mother in this topic.
So how does that relate to, say, a person that's having what we would call today like mother issues? Things like that, like relationships with their physical mother. Would that be something that they could look into and correlate, their problems with manifesting in the physical world, and that's playing out with their relationship with their moms?
Well, to answer your question, yes, that your relationship with your actual parent is going to have something to do with your relationship with your feminine principle. And that's, how what we say, it's like what surrounds us is within us. So a lot of times in real life circumstances and situations, we can get clues into, our deeper issues. And that's, why today's talk is all about the concept of the separation from mother. That it's a really important theme and it's an important myth that is typically missing in our Western socialization today. And probably one of the reasons why, our relationships with our actual parents, the whole family psychosis that goes on today that we call the dysfunctional family, is a direct result of our inability to take these deeper issues as principles, and also the importance of the separation from mother as being a point of passage and a starting point for the development of, this psychological spiritual process that we talk about, this thing called apotheosis. And that's the thing that's missing, and so as a result, we don't separate from this pattern. We don't separate from mother. And of course, the reason why it felt so bad is because we try and interpret this literally. So in other words, you've got somebody who is smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer, listening to this and saying, well, I left home years ago. Well, what we don't understand is that this separation from mother is not, running away from home. It's not rebelling against society. But it is a separation from this principle, this underlying relationship of matter and mind. These are deeper issues. And that's where, the practice of Kriya Yoga that we teach, which is a very performance-based system of yoga, is founded on, these principles that we don't want to rebel against mother. What we want to do is we want to be able to harness the principle of the feminine and integrate it with this masculine principle. And in order to do that, the process begins with first we have to divide and conquer before we can unite and stand.
So I take it our first step is obviously to understand what the mother principle is all about. But after we understand that, then how do we, as you say, how do we divide to conquer?
Right, because our first point of passage was typically around age 7. As infants, we need mom and dad. If you're an infant and somebody out there does not like you, you are going to die. But now, when your first point of passage, which was typically around age 7, which was in the Christian religion that I was exposed to, had sacraments. And around age 7, you received what they called your Holy Communion. And at that point, one of the things I do remember was they said that now you reach the age of reason. Now, of course, when I went through this, the actual sacrament itself was an empty form. And I really didn't understand what the intention behind it was at all. But the whole intention of this is of that point of passage is that it is no longer appropriate for me to operate from these infantile defense mechanisms, my need for approval. See, it's this pattern that we refer to as mother that we must separate from. Now, one of the things that I found was really interesting in today's society is, when they are doing statistical studies with teenagers, it's not sex and drugs that motivate them, but it's peer pressure. It's my need for approval. So we're in our teens, but we're still operating from infantile defense mechanisms. So, we're in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, and we're still secretly seeking approval in our decision-making. The underlying dynamic is that we have not separated from mother. We have not separated from this pattern. And like we had talked in some of the earlier shows, our physical bodies, this creative principle, this principle of manifestation has all the power of preservation and survival. And if we are not able to manage it, then we will be controlled by it. And so that's why this process in development begins with this separation. But what we find is that it's not going to be all that easy to do.
So the child at 7 who doesn't go through this rite of passage is potentially in danger later on in life from performing this separation. So where's the breakdown? How come there is no rite of passage?
Well, again, I think probably because there is no danger. it's not a question of danger. You're not in a life-threatening situation. That was the thing that we found, is that, we can chronologically age and psychologically, spiritually remain in this underdeveloped state. We can survive and not grow. Now, the reason there isn't any more points of passage is because we've lost touch with the meaning and purpose behind the rituals, the ceremonies, the ordeals, the ascetic practices. The institutions that have taken over, the communities that were at one time in place that educated people in how to become humans in the adult state, that's where it broke down, I think. But you can chronologically age and psychologically, spiritually remain in this underdeveloped state. Now, there is going to be a kickback, because that's one of the things that we're finding today is that, even though we are chronologically aging and psychologically, spiritually remaining in this underdeveloped state, there is retribution. Most of us are struggling with the guilt, the shame, the anger, the resentment, the blame, the emptiness, the boredom that comes with being stuck in this regressive pattern. It comes from a kickback, from this unlived latent potential that we want to be whole people. But like one of the things we talk about is why do you have to separate from mother? Is because if we continue to draw from the source of sustenance that we are, if we continue to draw from the outside world, particles and waves, completion can't happen. That's where we talk about the physics of spirituality, that in order to be a whole person, you can't become a whole person and draw from fear and limitation. That's the physics. Like attracts like. To be a whole person, you must separate from this limited source of sustenance and then reconnect to this more reliable, more dependable, this invisible, intangible source of sustenance that will now have a different yield, different return.
So when we talk about the rites of passage, and you just mentioned the yield of return, I have heard you recount the story of the hero's journey. Is this what we're talking about, the rites of passage? And does that equal the hero's journey?
Yeah, the hero's journey, again, was another way of explaining this plight of consciousness, right? And the hero's journey begins with the boy separating from mother. Now, of course, the imagery there, seems like it's very gender sensitive, doesn't it? But in reality, when you understand the myth of the story, that, because if you're telling the story about the boy married to mother, the whole Oedipus complex, that was very big in the psychological communities, that if you don't understand what they're talking about and you start to take these images literally, it keeps you off point. But if you understand that the boy is a Mercury image, and so even though, like, when you're telling the story and all the girls are just snickering, it's not gender sensitive, that the boy is a Mercury image, which means that it's intelligence, your conscious mind. And if the boy is married to mother, that means the mind didn't separate from this pattern, that it came in with it, didn't separate from the body. And, of course, then that's what's going to run your show. Now, with regard to understanding, the meaning behind the hero's journey, that the boy must separate from mother, then there's this whole realm of labors and tasks, because, it's this whole process of cultivation, distilling, purifying, perfecting of ourselves physically and mentally. And then, of course, the final stage is the return to become king, that you're a whole person. But it's very important to understand that these stories are not gender sensitive, they're principle centered. You know, much like years ago the Baptist Church reinstated the doctrine, the woman must be subservient to the man. And of course, I had students at the time that were irate, all of which were women. And they would come in and say, what do you think about this? And I would look at them and I would say, well, you know, it's wisdom. You know, what the Bible is saying is wisdom. I don't agree with the Baptist interpretation. The Bible is not saying that your road to enlightenment is to train your wife to get you the paper. But what the Bible is saying is that your feminine principle, you know, this instinct, appetite, preservation, and survival, must be subservient to your masculine principle. Now, whether you are a man or a woman, the underlying dynamic of the story is the same, that intelligence must override emotion or feeling.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. I do want to talk about the dynamics of addictions, but first I do want to take a moment to hear a word from our sponsor. And listeners, we'll be back with you in a moment. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Well, welcome back, listeners. For those of you just joining us, you are listening to The Voice of Yoga. I am Lisa Winton. With me is Swami Jayananda, and we are talking consciousness. So before our break, I had mentioned to you that I would like to have a discussion with you about the dynamics of addiction. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talk about is that we're all codependent, you know, that we all have needs. The underlying dynamic of all of our addictions is, you know, need. And when we are, you know, talking about, you know, this separation from mother, that mother, the physical body, the driving force of preservation and survival is behind all of our addictions. And the whole thing is what we have to recognize is, you know, coming back to what we have said in other shows, that, you know, the physics of spirituality is like attracts like. Now, whatever it is that we are addicted to is going to really have a big impact on what we become. So like we have said in other shows, if we desire particles, we will be of an animal nature or something that is even subhuman. If we desire waves, we will be of a human nature. But if we desire this void, this nothingness, this thing they call God or spirit, then we will be of a divine nature. And so the reason why we have to separate from mother in order for us to reconnect to something that will make us become something different is the underdriving forces behind, you know, disciplines like religions and yoga. And again, coming back to what we have been saying, these are the things that are missing in our socialization today. to the point that, we think God is a person instead of an energy field, instead of a source of sustenance. And so as a result, we think religion is a belief system instead of instruction to do something. And that's where I think, what we teach here at Institute for Personal Development is very different, because it is very science-based. It is very, has an evidence procedure as opposed to a belief system that's just more intellectual and theoretical.
So I want to have a conversation about, I want to go back to, the addictions, and we know there are different types of addictions. We have people who say they're addicted to chocolate, or people who say they're, addicted to certain types of food and things like that. So what do you recommend for those people? What's the first thing that they need to do to, I guess they have to understand that they have an addiction, right? And realize that they're using it to validate themselves. But then how would they overcome that physical addiction?
Yeah, the whole thing, I love what C.S. Lewis said, and he says something to the effect that in the end, if you do not choose the kingdom of God, it does not matter what you chose instead. That we're all codependent, we all have needs, but there's only one truth. There's only one religion. There's only one yoga. There's only one number one need. There's only one God. And if you haven't figured out what that is and you're not addicted to it, it really doesn't matter what you're addicted to instead. There's really only one way that this goes right. And that's what we said in probably our first show, that, it's very important where you get your information and how you interpret these texts that are out there, because they're all saying the same thing. It's just that if you're lost in intellectualism, or if you're lost in the pain, pleasure, control dramas of your physical body, then it's very difficult to see that. And so the main thing that I really try and get people to do is to literally try to educate themselves. And because it doesn't really happen in varying degrees of performance. It's physics, it's not college. You're not getting credit for your efforts. It's not like, in the end, God can make a decision that we're going to judge us on a curve. It doesn't play like that. God isn't a person, it's an energy field. And if you don't internalize it in your body and get your body to recognize it, then you're going to be addicted to something that's going to keep you in a limited sense of who you are. There's nothing wrong with it, but you're not going to optimize your efforts. One of the things we always say, stand in fear and you stand to lose. And so again, it's going to come down to, finding good leadership, finding a good example, and then, going from knowing to doing. And that's a big part of, like most of the programs that we offer. It's what we say. We are a performance-based yoga system, basically.
So the person who is, craving the, Ben and Jerry's Cherry Garcia or something like that, so intellectually and physically, they just need to take that quarter turn towards God or Spirit, this energy field, and that should help dispel their addiction or their craving.
Well, to answer your question, that the easiest way to get out from underneath any unnecessary dependency, any addiction, is to substitute. Substitution is key because you can't get rid of desire. That's one of the misconceptions, and that's some of the things that I find that a lot of people are trying to do. Physics will not allow it. Matter can't be created nor destroyed, only changed. But one of the things that we always say, your body is like a monkey, and a monkey will not let go of one branch unless it has another branch in the other hand. Now, the secret to substitution, however, is to substitute your necessary dependencies for unnecessary dependencies. So, in essence, you have to understand the difference between a need and a want, and then knowing what your needs are in their order of importance. And the way that you will determine the importance of a need is how long can I live without it. Because you can live weeks without food, you can live days without water, you can live minutes without air. Without the grace of God, without the life force, we expire immediately. The secret to life, and I don't care where you go to find that, is to put this thing called God first. And the way that will translate and prove out is to use what you need to validate those fears that are coming from your body. Now, that's one of the reasons why I really embrace the system of yoga that we teach, is because we use the body. Intellectually, nobody can dispute the importance of breath. But very few people feel, they're not reveling in the availability of their next breath. They're looking for something else. It's like my body is longing for a cup of coffee. My body is longing for a cigarette. My body is longing for a text. That's all patterning. That's all conditioning. And that can all be changed. And when you do that in the framework of doing it, if you are smart enough to substitute what you really do need for that yearning, and you literally internalize what you really do need, your number one need, as a symbol for validation in your body, then you will understand what we call Kriya Yoga, the union of the individual with the divine. And you will understand the whole concept of this separation from Mother, from this pattern, my need for external reinforcement.
Well, in closing, I would like to invite our listeners out there to please visit our website, follow us on Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook. We do enjoy hearing from you, so keep those comments, questions, and curiosities coming. On our program next week, we will be discussing the concept of sex out of marriage and how that relates to Kriya Yoga. So, Swami, any final thoughts or comments on our discussion today?
Well, just the whole thing of, how important it is to have good goals and objectives, to understand, just what am I trying to do, with a spiritual practice, and understanding, the language that these practices were, I want to say, codified in. That the whole thing is that there is a difference between a human in the larvae state, a difference of the human in the chrysalis state, and the difference between the human in the adult state. And those are the things that, we're trying to bring to the foreground, with a lot of these sessions that we've been holding. And so with that, I will wish you a good day and namaste, and I'll give it back to you.
Well, thank you, and thank the listeners for tuning into our program today. I know I got a lot of our discussion, especially three very important words, and that is put God first. You are listening The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton signing off with Swami Jayananda. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.